The Birmingham Zoo in Alabama spends about $30,000 every single day just to keep its animals alive, fed, healthy, and legally compliant with federal welfare standards. Tickets at the gate average around $20 per adult visitor. Do the math and you'll see the problem within seconds. A mid-sized American zoo has to sell somewhere between 400 and 600 tickets before noon just to cover care costs alone, before a single utility bill, a single paycheck, or a single pound of reinforced concrete has been touched. What nobody tells you is where the money actually goes. Because the ticket window is the last part of this financial story, not the first. The dream version of zoo ownership is easy to picture. You hold the keys to the gates, the giraffes, the panoramic African savanna exhibit with the thatched observation shelter, and the sight lines that families drive 3 hours to photograph. Kids press their hands against the acrylic, breath fogging the glass, completely lost in something that feels larger than the world they came from. Parents swipe a card without hesitation. Every Saturday from April through September, the parking lot fills before the gates open. That version is real. But it describes about 6 weeks out of every year. The rest is a grinding, 12-month fixed cost engine that keeps running on the same fuel, whether the gate is open or locked. Whether it's a warm August weekend or a cold Tuesday in February when 4 school groups cancel and the lot sits empty and the giraffes still need their morning delivery of hay and fresh browse. There are currently 238 AZA accredited zoos and aquariums operating in the United States and 13 other countries, and the vast majority of them function as 501c3 non-profit institutions. The ones that don't, private, for-profit operation, are often the ones that struggle hardest with the math, because the costs are massive and almost entirely non-negotiable regardless of how many people showed up this weekend. Start with the land itself. A serious, accredited facility requires dozens of acres at minimum, and real estate in or near a metro market carries a price that puts acquisition beyond reach for almost anyone without institutional capital or a municipal partner behind them. Most of the large urban zoos in America, Dallas, San Diego, Denver, Cincinnati, operate on city-owned land under long-term management agreements, which transfers the real estate cost off the zoo's books and onto the public. That arrangement is one of the foundational subsidies most visitors never think about when they're buying a soda at the concession stand. But land is only the starting point. The structures sitting on that land are where the serious capital expenditure lies. Modern zoo enclosures are not cages. A state-of-the-art elephant habitat, the kind that meets current AZA welfare standards and attracts the major gift donors needed to fund operation, can cost anywhere from $20 million at the low end to upward of $80 million for a full, immersive multi-acre complex with climate-controlled indoor barns, heated flooring systems, natural substrate surfaces for foot health, and dedicated veterinary access passages built into the structure itself. That is a single exhibit. Major zoos have dozens. The elephant facility is the most expensive individual exhibit to construct, but it isn't the only one demanding specialized infrastructure. Tropical species, great apes, big cats, reptiles from equatorial habitats, require climate-controlled interior spaces that hold stable temperatures regardless of what the local winter does outside. The heating systems for a large primate building alone can drive utility bills into the hundreds of thousands of dollars per year. Cold-adapted species flip that equation: artificial chilling systems, refrigerated substrates, and cooling costs that spike in summer while the zoo's attendance is at its highest. Water is its own infrastructure category entirely. A single large aquatic exhibit, a hippo pool, a sea lion habitat, a penguin encounter, or a shark tank requires industrial-grade filtration and water treatment systems running continuously every hour, every day. The filtration equipment for a major marine mammal exhibit can cost several $1 million to install, and then requires trained water quality operators, ongoing chemical costs, and regular mechanical maintenance. A filtration failure is not a maintenance delay. It is a veterinary emergency with a clock attached. On top of all of this, every wildlife exhibitor in the United States is licensed and regulated by the USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service under the Animal Welfare Act, which means routine inspections, compliance documentation, and mandatory corrective action when findings arise. AZA-accredited zoos hold themselves to standards that go substantially beyond federal minimums, which means the compliance cost runs higher, not lower, as a deliberate condition of maintaining accreditation. That accreditation opens the grant relationships, the government contracts, and the institutional donor networks that keep many of these organizations financially viable. Lose it, and the financial architecture collapses faster than the collection can be rehomed. Now, the daily operating picture. The animal nutrition budget at a regional zoo with a full collection is not a number that flexes with the season or with visitor attendance. An adult African elephant eats between 150 and 300 pounds of food per day, primarily hay, browse material, and fresh produce. Carrying for a single elephant, food, dedicated keeper time, routine veterinary oversight, can approach $100,000 per year in total annual care costs. That is one animal. Add a breeding pair and an offspring, and you're approaching $250,000 to $300,000 annually in direct care costs for that exhibit alone, Well, before you factor in the mortgage payment on the $30 million barn they live in. Large carnivores eat 10 to 15 pounds of high-quality meat every single day. Sourcing and managing cold chain logistics for protein at scale across an entire predator collection is a procurement operation with its own vendor relationships, storage requirements, and spoilage risk, not a weekly grocery trip. Protein costs across a full predator wing can exceed tens of thousands of dollars per month at a mid to large facility. Primates add a different layer of complexity entirely. Great apes require not just specialized nutrition but active cognitive enrichment, rotating puzzle feeders, behavioral programs, environmental modifications. Because a bored, understimulated primate develops psychological conditions that become expensive and often chronic veterinary problem. The labor embedded in enrichment programs is real, ongoing, and largely invisible to the visitor walking past the exhibit. The veterinary department is where the staffing costs get serious. A zoo veterinarian in the United States earns anywhere from $112,000 to $18,000 annually, with department heads and board-certified specialists at or above the upper end of that range. That salary covers someone capable of performing anesthesia on a giraffe at 2 in the morning, reading a blood panel on a clouded leopard, managing the reproductive health of a critically endangered black rhinoceros, and making the call on a terminally ill animal with no good option. It is a specialty that requires years of training beyond a standard veterinary degree, and there are not many people in the country qualified to do it at the standard a serious zoo requires. Most mid to large operations employ multiple veterinarians and veterinary technicians, and the diagnostic equipment that team requires. Portable imaging systems, large animal anesthesia equipment, on-site laboratory capacity, represents a capital investment running into the hundreds of thousands of dollars before a single patient has been seen. Zookeeper wages sit at the opposite end of the salary spectrum. Typical annual compensation for a keeper at a mid-tier facility ranges from roughly $30,000 to $45,000 per year. That number is low for a job that starts before dawn, involves direct contact with animals that could kill a person without intent to do so, demands detailed daily behavioral observation, and includes physically demanding prep, cleaning, and enrichment delivery for animals that take no days off ever. Keeper turnover is a persistent structural problem, and recruiting candidates into a physically demanding, modestly compensated field means many zoos operate with staffing gaps that put additional pressure on the keepers who stay. A regional zoo with 200 to 300 animals might employ somewhere between 40 and 80 full-time staff across animal care, veterinary, education, facilities maintenance, security, and administration. Total payroll at that scale, including employer-side benefits, can reach $3 to $5 million annually. In many zoos, payroll alone accounts for 60% or more of total operating expenditure. Security infrastructure is another line item that gets systematically underestimated until something fails. Double-gated perimeter fencing for a large predator collection, the kind of layered, inspection-grade barrier systems that prevent both animal escapes and unauthorized human entry, costs significant money to install correctly and requires ongoing maintenance to keep certified. When a fence section fails at 2 a.m. on a Saturday, there is no option to address it on Monday. Facilities maintenance at a serious zoo is not a cost you can defer. It is animal safety infrastructure. Now the income. Ticket sales are the most visible revenue stream and, in most cases, the least stable. Adult admission at US zoos ranges from about $15 on the low end to over $65 at major urban facilities, with most regional zoos landing in the $20 to $30 range. Industry data indicates that approximately 58% of a typical zoo's annual revenue comes from earned income. Admissions, memberships, parking, food service, and retail. The remaining 40% or so comes from contributed income, government subsidies, private donations, corporate sponsorships, and grant funding. Take that 40% away, and most zoos cannot fund their operations through a single fiscal year. Memberships are arguably the most strategically valuable component of earned income, and the operators who understand this business know it. A family membership at $150 to $250 per year generates predictable, front-loaded cash in January when gate revenue is minimal, produces repeat visitors who spend more on food and retail per visit than walk-up buyers, and cultivates a pool of individuals who already identify as supporters of the institution. Members who pay annual dues today are the major gift prospects of next decade. They are also the people who open their phones and donate when something goes wrong. When COVID forced closures across the United States in March of 2020, the financial structure of zoo ownership was exposed with almost clinical clarity. The gate closed. Earned revenue dropped to near zero. The animals still had to be fed every morning. The filtration systems never stopped running. The veterinary staff had to remain on site. Some smaller facilities reported having sufficient reserves for only a few weeks of continued operations before they would be unable to fund basic animal care. The institutions that survived those months were almost uniformly the ones with strong membership programs, diversified government relationships, and donor networks that activated quickly when an emergency appeal went out. That pattern was not accidental. It was the direct financial consequence of years of investment in relationship infrastructure that had nothing to do with ticket sales. Concessions and retail deserve more credit than they typically receive in discussions of zoo economics. A family of 4 that spends 6 hours on a summer Saturday will spend an average of $15 to $25 per person beyond their admission ticket on food, beverages, and merchandise. That secondary spend, accumulated across a high attendance weekend with several thousand visitors, can represent a meaningful fraction of a zoo's monthly operating cash. The gift shop in particular operates on margins that most of the rest of the zoo cannot match. A plush giraffe retailing at $24 often has a landed cost under $9. A well-run gift shop on a busy August weekend can generate enough margin to cover several days of animal food costs. Corporate sponsorships operate on a different financial and relational logic. A company underwriting a major exhibit is paying for demographic access, brand alignment, and marketing visibility in an environment where visitors are relaxed, engaged, and likely to retain brand impression. At a well-trafficked urban zoo, exhibit naming rights and presenting sponsorships range from $50,000 to well over $100,000 annually, typically structured as multi-year commitments that give both parties planning stability. The Maryland Zoo in Baltimore publishes its corporate sponsorship pricing publicly, and individual animal sponsorships range from a few $1,000s for smaller species to tens of thousands per year for flagship predators and charismatic megafauna. A zoo with a well-resourced development program can layer corporate revenue into its budget in a way that materially narrows the gap between earned income and total operating cost. Government support fills a structural gap that most visitors drive past without recognizing. Some of the most beloved public zoos in America charge no admission at all. The St. Louis Zoo operates partly on the proceeds of a dedicated property tax district established in 1916, giving it a public revenue baseline that has held for over a century. The Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago is entirely free to the public and operates through a combination of private philanthropy and municipal partnership. Both of these models are exceptional, and the political and historical conditions that produce them are not reproducible. For the zoo without a tax district or a legacy government commitment, the public subsidy looks different: management agreements, capital improvement grants, land use partnerships where the city owns the land and the nonprofit operates the facility. The subsidy is structural in all of these arrangements, not optional. Here is the honest financial picture. A well-managed, mid-sized AZA accredited zoo running an annual operating budget in the $5 to $8 million range might generate $3 to $4 million from earned income in a strong year. The remaining $2 to $3 million has to be assembled from donations, grants, government support, and corporate partnerships. Operating surplus in that model, in a genuinely good year, might reach the low hundreds of thousands of dollars. Many zoos run at a technical operating deficit and draw down reserves or accelerate fundraising to close the gap. Capital improvements, new exhibits, aging infrastructure replacement, mandatory welfare upgrades almost always require a separate capital campaign running parallel to annual operation. A zoo that needs a new large animal barn doesn't fund it from gift shop proceeds. That money comes from a multi-year targeted donor campaign anchored by a lead gift in the multiple millions from a single institution or committed individual. The operators who sustain these organizations over decades have learned to treat fundraising not as a supplemental function, but as a core operational priority on equal footing with animal care. They employ development professionals whose entire focus is cultivating the relationships that produce those anchor gifts. They maintain board structures that include individuals who contribute personally and who open corporate doors that wouldn't otherwise open. They build membership programs designed to move people through a loyalty arc from first-time visitor to annual supporter to planned estate gift. The zoos that ultimately struggle are most often the ones that built the collection before they built the financial infrastructure to support it. Animals arrived first. Development staff came second. Eventually, the gap between those two timelines becomes a cash crisis. Small private operations, those holding USDA exhibitor licenses without AZA accreditation and without access to the institutional donor base that accreditation opened, face a harder version of this math with fewer instruments to address it. They rely almost entirely on gate revenue, which means a poor summer, a regional heat wave, an economic slowdown, a news cycle that scares families away, can cut annual revenue by 30 to 40%. One bad season without reserves can be existential. 2 consecutive ones usually ends the operation. The San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance, which operates both the San Diego Zoo and the Safari Park and runs one of the most financially sophisticated zoological organizations in the world, reported approximately $468 million in revenue against $429 million in expenses in its most recently reported annual figures. That $39 million margin looks substantial until you note that the organization operates 2 major facilities, employs thousands of staff, and funds an active international conservation program across dozens of field sites. Every dollar of that surplus has been spoken for before the report is published, and San Diego is the best case version of this model. Most zoos in America don't operate at anything near that scale, and a gap of $39 million between revenue and expenses is not something they have the infrastructure to produce. Most are running on margins narrow enough that a single unexpected capital failure, a water filtration breakdown, a fence section that fails inspection, an animal requiring months of intensive veterinary care, can erase a year of carefully managed surplus in 1 quarter. The animals never stop costing. The gate closes every November as attendance falls. The filtration pump does not take a seasonal break. The giraffe's morning hay delivery arrives at the same time regardless of whether 4,000 people or 40 people bought tickets the day before. The people who run these institutions successfully over the long term are not, at their core, idealists who love animals and figured out the business later. They are financial operators with deep reserves of institutional patience who happen to love animals. That combination is rarer than it looks, and the quiet irony underneath all of it is this: the very investments that make a zoo worth visiting, the immersive habitats, the naturalistic design, the carefully engineered environment that makes a visitor feel like they've stepped into a different world, are precisely the investments that make the financial model hardest to sustain. The better the zoo, the higher the fixed cost base. The higher the fixed cost base, the more the institution depends on contributed income it cannot control from donors whose priorities shift, from governments whose budgets get cut, from corporate partners who walk away in a recession. You build the world-class elephant habitat to attract the major gift donors who fund the mission. Then you spend the next 30 years fundraising to keep the heat on inside it. The Birmingham Zoo still runs on $30,000 a day. The gates open at 10. The animals ate at dawn.